I never thought a hike with family would end, with my spine cracked against cold stone and my soul torn from the inside out. It started with the wind, howling fierce through the blue ridge like a warning. Then the shove. One hard push to my back, and the world tilted. Sky turned to rock. My arms flailed for Henry, but we were both already in the air. We landed hard, bone on granite. The air punched out of my lungs. I tried to sit up, but pain seized my side. Henry's voice came next, low and urgent in my ear. "Don't move. Pretend you're dead." I froze. My face pressed into the dirt, the scent of moss and blood mixing in my nose. Overhead. Footsteps. Damien's boots, scraping the overlooked gravel. Melissa's laugh, sharp and bright, like breaking glass. Then, silence. They didn't call down, didn't run for help, just left. They thought we were gone. I lay there with my ribs aching and one eye cracked just enough to see Melissa's coffee cup, lipstick smeared and still warm, rolling near the cliff's edge. It was mine. I'd packed it that morning, along with the granola bars, along with the first aid kit, along with the trust. But the backpack was gone. The one with our phones, our IDs, our small ledger book I kept in my knitting bag. Missing. Henry didn't speak for a long time, just breathed. When the footsteps faded, he finally muttered, "We've been fools, Hilda, all this time." The sun slanted across the forest in ribbons of orange, casting long shadows that trembled like they knew something I didn't. Somewhere above, a ranger's truck passed, its distant rumble like, "Hope you're not sure you deserve." I wanted to call out, but I didn't. Not yet, not with my son still nearby. I could hear him now and then, his voice cracking as he spoke to someone on the phone, probably confirming our accident, probably securing his future. I blinked through tears I didn't know I still had. Not for the pain, not even for the betrayal, but for the fact that, lying there, I still wanted to believe he wouldn't do this. That maybe it was Melissa. That maybe my son wasn't capable of murder. But the truth lay heavier than my broken ribs. He pushed us. And, as their voices faded into leaves and wind, Henry whispered again, with something different in his tone this time. Not fear, not grief, something like release. "There's something I never told you. About Richard. About what really happened 25 years ago. 2 days have passed since we lay pretending dead among the rocks. They haven't shown up. Not once, not at the hospital, not in a text, not in a call. Nothing. I'm writing this now from room 314B of Mission Hospital's recovery wing. My left hand's stiff and trembling, but the words need to come out before the morphine clouds them again. Every letter hurts, but not as much as what I now know. Henry sleeps beside me, his breathing shallow but steady. Bruised lungs, 2 cracked ribs, shoulder dislocated. Mine? Fractured wrist, 3 cracked ribs, stitches along my hairline. The nurses keep calling it a miracle. I suppose that's one word for it. They think we were hiking and fell. Accidental trauma. The report's clean. But I know better. So does Henry. He's the one who held me still when I wanted to sit up and scream. The one who whispered that awful truth once we heard Damien's tires roll off. My son thinks we're dead. I asked Nurse Tina this morning if anyone had inquired about us. Her eyes told me before her voice did. "No visitors logged, Mrs. Mallory." She whispered it with a mix of pity and something else. Maybe suspicion. Maybe solidarity. She slid a pen into my palm when she changed my IV bag and leaned in close, murmuring, "You need to talk to someone. Someone real." I nodded, because she was right. They don't know we're alive. That's our only advantage, and I won't waste it. The room smells like antiseptic and lemon wax. The TV's off. I don't want distractions. I've had a lifetime of distractions. Birthdays, casseroles, church bulletins, joint bank accounts, watching Damien's face tighten every time money was mentioned. None of it prepared me for this. They didn't even send flowers. I signed the hospital intake forms under my maiden name, Hilda P. Davis. It was instinct, but also protection. If they're watching our accounts, checking records, they won't see it yet. I need time. Time to think. Time to remember. Because as I lay there in the cold grass waiting to die, Henry told me something that pulled the floor out from beneath me all over again. Richard didn't fall. He didn't stumble into that gorge, like they said, and Melissa's name, her on the forged insurance policy that paid out after. We were grieving a lie. 3 days before the fall, we were sipping coffee on the back porch, like we always did. The mug warmed my palms, and the morning air carried that damp, leafy smell that October brings to Asheville. Crickets still chirped low from the trees lining Flint Street, and "Jeopardy!" murmured in the background, waiting for 7 a.m. sharp. Our bungalow, a squat little one-story built in, 71, creaked with the sounds of waking. That old place had its own heartbeat. I wore the same slippers I've had since before Damien got married. They're soft with wear and mended twice at the toe. I remember watching Henry settle into his lawn chair, sighing the way only retired men do when the day is theirs. That moment, I've replayed it 1,000 times since the fall. Because it was the last time things felt normal, Damien had called at 8:04, asking, again, if we'd had a chance to check our retirement balance. "Just want to make sure it's earning right, Mama," he said, casual as a neighbor borrowing sugar. I knew the subtext. He'd check it himself if he still had login access, which he didn't. Not since Henry changed the passwords in July. There'd been no argument. Damien had always acted like our finances were a family group project, even though Henry and I had never once asked for help. It became routine, Sunday check-ins that felt less like love and more like audits. If the balance dipped, he'd gently suggest a, quote, budget review. If it rose, he'd angle for another family investment opportunity. Still, I tried not to see it for what it was. At Ingalls, I used to keep grocery receipts tucked in the drawer by the fridge. One day, they vanished. Melissa had been over that morning, claiming to help organize the clutter. I asked about them, and she gave me that smile. Tight, polite, unbothered. "Oh, I shredded those old things. You don't need proof of peanut butter purchases." That's when I stopped keeping receipts. But I remember every dollar, because I was the one pulling them from our joint account, quietly, obediently. Damien never outright asked for cash. He just reminded me, every chance he got, of how much they sacrificed to visit, to bring the grandkids, to care. We'd sent $800 that month alone. Groceries, school clothes, a flat tire, all under just helping. Henry didn't say much, but the way he stared at that bank ledger one night, longer than necessary, I knew he felt it too. The ache sharpened when I remembered the first time Damien slid behind the wheel of a car. It was June 2003. He had just turned 16, lanky, and all elbows, barely tall enough to see over the cracked dashboard of our old beige Toyota Camry. I had one hand gripping the passenger door, the other clutching my chest, like that alone might protect me from teenage recklessness. Henry stood at the curb, waving us out with 2 fingers and a nod. "Go easy on her, son," he laughed. "That car's got more years than both of you put together." Damien grinned, revved the engine like it was a race car, and we crawled out of our College Street driveway at 10 miles an hour. Back then, he was still tender in his own way. Every now and then, he'd scribble little notes for me. "Thanks for lunch, Mama," or "Math sucks, but you don't." He'd ask for extra gas money and promise to mow the lawn next weekend. Half the time he forgot, but I didn't mind. He was mine. That summer, we paid cash for his license, $36 at the DMV, plus another $12 for the retake after he failed parallel parking. I still have the receipts somewhere in a shoebox, next to a fading Polaroid. Him standing beside the Camry, keys in hand, grinning like he'd just been handed the world. He used to say, "I'll take care of you one day, Mama. Just wait. You'll see." And I believed him. I did. Not because I was naive, but because that boy, that version of him, looked me in the eyes when he said it. The house on College Street was smaller than the one on Flint, but it had charm. Front porch swing, rose bushes I never could keep alive, neighbors who waved every morning. I taught him how to drive in that neighborhood, inch by inch, corner by corner. I taught him patience, control, trust. Somewhere along the way, he learned other things. Melissa entered the picture a decade later. The lines on his face grew deeper, his eyes sharper, his laughter scarcer. But I still looked for the boy behind the man. I kept his promises warm in my pocket like coins. Now, I wonder if he meant it, or if he just said what he knew I wanted to hear. Because the hand that once gripped the steering wheel so nervously was the same one that pushed us off that cliff. And that realization burns hotter than the fall ever did. I sat on the back porch with a notebook balanced on my knees, the ink smudging beneath my left hand, still stiff from the fracture. A breeze stirred the edge of the page, and I pressed it down, steadying myself. I wasn't writing for memory. I was writing for proof. Item by item, I began the list. 2019, $800 a month. Bank transfer set on the 1st. Damien had called it temporary, said they were short after Melissa's maternity leave. I remember the way he'd rubbed the back of his neck, sheepish. Just until we catch up. That lasted 5 years. 5 years at $800 a month. $46,200. Just family duty, he called it. I flipped the page. 2021, $25,000. Wired for a down payment on their house in West Asheville. I had withdrawn it from our joint savings after Melissa sent me a slideshow of cracked foundations and urgent timelines. She ended the email with, "We'd do the same for you." I remember thinking, that's what love does. It gives without counting. Until now. I didn't realize I'd started pressing the pen so hard until it tore through the paper. I walked the pages into First Carolina Bank that morning, slid them across the desk to Ms. Brenda. Quiet, competent, always in pressed slacks and pale lipstick. She didn't flinch, just nodded once, printed the transfers with quiet efficiency, and said, "You want to file a record request too, Mrs. Mallory?" Her tone was neutral, but her eyes weren't. "Yes," I said. "I want everything since 2019. She tapped a few keys. The printer hummed. And in minutes, I held in my hand 5 years of history. Dates, times, amounts. Every little sacrifice quantified. Every trust tested. Every lie, now anchored in ink. We had kept no secrets from them. Not then. I thought about the Christmas when Damien came late, arms full of discounted gifts, claiming traffic. I had wrapped a check in gold paper, slipped it in his jacket pocket before he left. 10,000 that time. Seed money, he'd said, for a business that never materialized. I'd never told Henry. Now, with Henry sleeping upstairs, and my hand throbbing from the effort of writing it all down, I realized something profound. This ledger wasn't about money. It was about patterns, about permission. I had trained them to expect rescue, to view our love not as presence but as provision. But no more. The pages in my lap weren't a list. They were evidence. The first red flag came dressed in politeness and casserole steam. August 18th. Melissa had brought over a spinach bake, unseasoned as always, and slid into the seat across from me like she owned it. Henry was just pulling off his work gloves when she launched in. "You know," she said, slicing into the crust with unnecessary force, "there's a strategy we've been researching. Helps older couples protect their assets." The word older landed like a pin dropped into silence. Damien, ever the echo, came in with that trained calm. "Mama, it's called a quitclaim. We just add our names to the deed. It's about tax protection, nothing else." I nodded slowly, but something in me stiffened. The casserole went cold on my plate. Melissa passed her phone across the table. On the screen was a PDF titled Joint Ownership Strategy.pdf, a friendly font, a clean signature line. "Just preliminary," she smiled. "You don't have to do anything today. But it's smart. People lose homes all the time when medical stuff hits. This would keep everything tidy." Henry, wiping his hands on a rag, frowned. "We've paid off this house." "Exactly!" Melissa's eyes lit with that false light she wears when she's almost got her way. "You wouldn't be giving anything up. Just sharing protection." I remember thinking, she talks like an agent, like someone who's rehearsed this pitch more than once. There was no mention of us moving, no pressure yet, just the suggestion of safety, wrapped in a document we hadn't asked for, discussed around a table where we'd prayed and celebrated, as if passing the salt. I didn't sign. Instead, I forwarded the email to myself and tucked it into a folder I named Possible Manipulation. Even then, I hated the title, hated how paranoid it made me feel. But something about the way Damien avoided my eyes when I opened the file, it made my stomach turn. Henry said nothing that night. He just stood by the window, hands in his pockets, looking out toward the street, as if watching for something that never came. They left after dessert, promising to bring the grandkids next weekend. Melissa kissed my cheek, her lips cool, eyes scanning the hallway like she was cataloging square footage. That casserole dish sat in the fridge for 6 days. I never touched it. By then, I had already begun rereading the deed papers from 1982. We left for the family weekend on a Friday afternoon, September 30th, the sky low with clouds and the Blue Ridge Parkway winding ahead like a ribbon tied too tight. Melissa called it a digital detox. 3 days in a rental cabin in Pisgah Forest, just the 4 of us and the kids. Disconnect to reconnect, she said, smiling like a brochure. I had my doubts, but Henry seemed hopeful. Maybe, for once, we'd talk like family again. As soon as we arrived, they gathered our phones. Damien held out a ceramic bowl like we were at some self-help retreat. No distractions, he said. Let's be present. I hesitated. My phone was my tether to Pastor Ray's daily texts, to my savings account, to the outside world. But Henry gave me a small nod, and I dropped it in. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. Melissa changed the Wi-Fi password without telling us. Just for the weekend, she chirped. Kids were streaming too much, and we want real bonding time. But something felt wrong. The cabin itself was lovely. Wood-paneled walls, a stone fireplace, mountain air that clung to your clothes like pine. But inside, there was a current, tense and controlled. Every conversation orbited their financial struggles, spoken in the same tones one might use for war stories. Damien mentioned their mortgage twice, casually. Melissa complained about inflation at least 3 times a meal. And always, there were little comments. You two are so lucky to be done working. Or, wish we had that retirement cushion. We stayed 2 nights. On the second morning, I tried to check our Wells Fargo account using the car's emergency GPS browser. An old, slow interface Henry remembered existed. No signal. When it finally connected after an hour of patience and cursing, the screen blinked. Account access unavailable. Henry's brow furrowed. He didn't say anything then, but I caught the twitch in his jaw. He hated that feeling. Helplessness dressed in courtesy. The digital blackout wasn't an accident. They fed us too much wine that night, Melissa pouring refills like it was a holiday. I poured mine down the sink. Something about the way they watched us, smiling, affectionate, overly attentive, felt less like family and more like a performance. We left Sunday morning, our phones returned with apologies. Thanks for trusting us, Damien said. But when I unlocked mine, my banking app was logged out. Back home, the quiet didn't feel like peace. It felt like something waiting. October 2nd, the Monday after the cabin, was damp and gray. The kind of day that clung to your clothes and made your knees ache. I stood at the kitchen sink washing coffee cups when Henry came in from the den, holding his tablet like it had bitten him. You need to see this, he said, voice low. We sat at the table while he tapped through the Wells Fargo portal, fingers stiffer than they used to be. The screen loaded slowly, the bar inching across like it too was reluctant to reveal what it held. Then, there it was, a transaction labeled Health Asset LLC for $20,000, withdrawn just after midnight on September 30th. The same night, we gave up our phones. Henry didn't look at me. He just exhaled through his nose and muttered, "They timed it." We stared at the screen in silence. I felt the floor shift beneath me again, like the rocks on the trail, only this time without the bruises. Just the raw throb of realization. That wasn't their money. That was ours. I didn't authorize that, I said. The words felt hollow, absurd. Of course I didn't. No form, no signature, no warning. Just gone. Henry clicked deeper. The account used was one we'd earmarked for medical emergencies. Ironically, it was meant for long-term care, home adaptations, hospice, things no one wants to talk about until they must. We hadn't even touched it when Henry had that bout of pneumonia last year. And now it had a gaping wound, $20,000 wide. Damien's voice echoed in my memory. It's all about being prepared, Mama. Gotta think long-term. Melissa, nodding beside him like a metronome. I opened my email. Nothing from them. No heads up. No request. Just a confirmation buried in spam. ACH withdrawal successful. The sender address was a shell, generic and sterile. No reply allowed. That afternoon, I called the local Wells Fargo branch. Mr. Alvarez answered. He'd helped us open our first joint account back in '97, back when Damien was still working part-time at the lumberyard. He listened without interrupting. Then he asked, gently, "Would you like me to flag the account for unauthorized access?" "Yes," I said, "and freeze anything else. Effective immediately." My voice didn't shake. Not anymore. The knot in my stomach wasn't confusion, it was clarity. They weren't waiting for us to die. They were budgeting for it. The next day, I saw him, my son, in the church parking lot, standing beside the oak tree where we used to take Sunday family photos. It was October 2nd. 1:15 p.m. service had just let out. The choir's last notes, still floating through the air like incense. Henry stayed behind, talking with Deacon Lila about her hip surgery. I needed a moment to breathe. That's when I spotted Damien leaning against the back of his truck, hands in his pockets, face tilted up like the sun might offer him grace. I walked up slowly. He looked thinner than usual, paler, eyes ringed in exhaustion. Or maybe guilt. He smiled when he saw me. Wounded, almost boyish. "Mama," he said, arms open. I didn't move. "You okay?" I asked. He stepped closer. "Can we talk?" I nodded, and we sat side by side on the short brick wall near the garden beds. The azaleas were gone now, just dirt and mulch, waiting for spring. He took a shaky breath, then reached for my hand. "I know you've been worried." I waited. He looked down at our fingers. That withdrawal. It was me. I messed up. It was supposed to be for a medical fund. A tax shelter. Melissa read about it online. I didn't think it would hit like that. We thought we had more time to explain. Explain what? My voice was even but cold. That it was for you and Dad. For your care. Long-term planning, you know? We thought if the money was protected, you wouldn't be prey for scammers. You've seen those news stories. His voice cracked on the word scammers, like he was hoping emotion might excuse the logic. I didn't blink. I didn't nod. Then he did something I wasn't prepared for. He started crying. Tears welled in his eyes, slid down his cheeks. He pulled me into a hug and said, "I'm sorry, Mama. I didn't mean to scare you. I promise I'll make it right. Just give me one more day to fix it." His arms were warm, his breath shaky. For a second, I remembered the boy who scraped his knees chasing fireflies. I didn't believe a word of it, but I let the hug happen. I let his tears fall. In my purse, my Bible sat open to Psalm chapter 27, a folded note tucked inside. Trust God. Don't sign anything. The moment Henry whispered the truth, the rocks beneath us felt steadier than the world above ever had. October 3rd, 4:30 p.m. The sun had shifted lower, casting gold through the treetops while our blood dried against stone. I was half conscious, breath tight from the fall, the taste of iron still in my mouth. Henry's voice came low, rasped through grit and cracked ribs. "It wasn't an accident," he said, eyes fixed on the trail above us. I blinked, trying to stay alert, trying to listen. "They killed Richard." I thought the pain in my side had peaked, but those words cut deeper than the jagged bone beneath my skin. What are you talking about?" Henry didn't look at me. He was staring up toward the ridge where Melissa's laughter had echoed just an hour earlier. "I saw them," he whispered, "in 1999. Damien and Richard. By the gorge." My mind reeled, trying to keep pace with the sudden unraveling. Richard, our firstborn. The one whose death I had grieved so hard my hair thinned. The one they said had fallen while hiking at night. The one whose funeral I could barely stand through. Damien had clutched my hand the whole time. Silent, somber, supportive. Henry turned his face toward me, bruised and solemn. They argued about money. Richard had found something. Damien siphoning from our joint account. He threatened to go to the police. I tried to speak, but the air wouldn't come. Henry continued, slower now. "I followed Damien that night. I saw them at the gorge, heard yelling. Then, silence. When I reached him, he was crying. Said it was an accident, that Richard slipped." "And you believed him?" He closed his eyes. I wanted to. We lay there, two broken bodies in a ravine, and I felt my heart crack into something colder than pain. "Melissa forged the beneficiary line," Henry added. "The insurance policy we never got paid for?" It was rerouted. I found the paperwork 3 months after. The signature wasn't Richard's. And you kept it quiet? His silence was louder than confession. They'd already taken one son, he whispered. I thought I could protect the other. That was the moment it all shifted. I stopped hoping for reconciliation. Stopped believing this was just misguided love wrapped in entitlement. By October 7th, I wasn't grieving anymore. I was organizing. Henry slept through most of the morning, his breath shallow but strong, while I sat in the hospital billing office with a clipboard, a pen, and a list in my mind so sharp it could have cut through steel. The woman at the front desk, silver-haired and soft-spoken, handed me a privacy consent form. I signed it with my maiden name again, Hilda P. Davis. That was the name on my emergency savings, the name I'd kept quietly alive since 2001, for reasons I couldn't explain until now. Ms. Brenda answered on the second ring. First Carolina Bank had seen me through 40 years of deposits, mortgage payments, and overdraft fees during lean years. She recognized my voice before I even gave my account number. I need to cancel every automatic transfer connected to Damian Mallory or Melissa Mallory, I said. Voice steady. A pause. Then, carefully, do you suspect fraud, Mrs. Davis? I don't suspect. I know. And I want every account access revoked. Online logins, mobile keys, authorized users, all of it. I want the savings locked. I want new PINs issued. I want a freeze order placed today. Brenda's keyboard clicked like a sewing machine. Yes, ma'am. We'll flag it and require in-person ID for anything moving forward. Good. And notarize it. I don't want them contesting a thing. Understood. After we hung up, I opened my voicemail. 4 messages. All Damian. The first was contrite. Mama, I'm worried. Please call me. The second was urgent. We need to talk about the accounts. Something's wrong. The third was less polished. I don't understand why you're doing this. Are you confused? And the fourth? Cold. Clipped. You're making a mistake. I deleted them without listening a second time. The nurse brought in fresh linens. I stared out the window at the parking lot where a red truck idled, engine running but not going anywhere. I imagined it was Damian's, pacing the perimeter of our lives, wondering why the gears had stopped turning in his favor. In that moment, I didn't feel old. I didn't feel broken. I felt clear. Melissa once said money was just energy. If that's true, then I had been powering their lives far too long. It was time to flip the switch. October 8th arrived, draped in cold rain, the kind that whispered against the church windows like secrets wanting out. Pastor Ray met us at the back door of Zion Hill, his coat already soaked at the shoulders. He didn't ask questions, just guided us inside to his office. The room where I had once cried after Richard's funeral, where Henry had taught Sunday school, where our wedding photo still hung in a frame too dusty to notice until now. We came carrying more than memories. The manila folder in my lap bulged with old receipts, printed emails, texts I had screen captured and time-stamped. Melissa's email was near the top. Subject line, just in case, jointplan.pdf. Below it, bank printouts showing monthly transfers, and tucked deep inside, something older, yellower, Henry's journal. He had kept it all those years, entries scattered like breadcrumbs across decades. Some pages mentioned odd behavior, strange calls Richard had made. Others described cash withdrawals, small at first, then larger, followed by guilt-laced entries about letting things slide. The real anchor was Richard's 1999 police file. Henry had obtained it years ago, quietly, using a friend's connection at the precinct. The report had always labeled it accidental, no suspects, no foul play, but the supplemental notes were incomplete. Pages were missing. Henry had circled dates in the margin. The autopsy showed injuries inconsistent with a simple fall. And then there was the printout from Richard's bank account. His last known login flagged a failed transfer attempt 5 hours before he died. That account had been closed 3 months later. No activity since. Pastor Ray said nothing for a long time after we handed it all over. He read in silence, the only sound the ticking of his wall clock and the soft squeak of his chair. When he finally looked up, his face had changed. "This isn't confusion," he said. "This is a cover-up. And it's not recent," we nodded. I'll scan and back up everything. 2 copies, one for your lawyer, one for me. And I'll store them here, under lock, until you say otherwise." Henry exhaled. I hadn't even realized he'd been holding his breath. Melissa had emailed that morning. The message was short. "Please reconsider your story. We can still fix this." She didn't say how. But the way she said story, like truth, was something you edited, not uncovered. Told me everything I needed to know. They weren't just afraid of consequences. They were afraid of documentation. By October 10th, our story was no longer a whisper between hospital beds and back offices. We had allies now, 3 to be exact, and each one brought a piece of ground to stand on. Pastor Ray had become more than a shepherd. He was now our archivist, scanning every receipt, printing backups, storing originals in the locked cabinet behind his hymnals. He kept the key on a ring beside his cross and didn't ask for thanks. Ms. Brenda from the bank had gone one step further. She began compiling a timeline of our financial history. "If this gets legal," she said while adjusting her glasses, "you're going to need structure, not just emotion." Her printouts were color-coded, with sticky notes flagging inconsistencies. I'd never seen such meticulous outrage. And then there was Detective Latrice Connor, retired but never idle. She was a friend of Pastor Ray's niece, visiting from Charlotte. We met her that morning in the church kitchen over stale coffee and a lemon muffin. Tall, no nonsense, with gray streaks framing her temples like lightning bolts. She listened without interruption, only nodding now and then. When we finished, she sat back, folded her arms, and said, "They've escalated this too far. You were witnesses until they thought you weren't. Now you're a liability." I remember feeling the word liability settle over me like frost. Not mother, not father, not even victims. Just obstacles to an inheritance they wanted clean. Later that day, the envelope arrived. Unmarked, slipped into our mailbox. No stamp. Inside, a folded sheet of thick paper, a cease and desist letter. No law firm listed, no signature, just threats disguised as concern. Any further defamation, it warned, may result in legal action. My name was typed. So was Henry's. We knew it was Damien. The same boy who once cried over a B- in algebra now sent veiled threats to his broken parents. Melissa's hand was in it too. I could hear her phrasing in the sentence structure, that polished cruelty masked in calm. But by then, we were beyond fear. Detective Connor asked for copies of everything. Start with motive, follow the money, then timeline the harm. Her pen moved swiftly across the page as she mapped what we'd lived. They'll say it's complicated, but what they really mean is traceable. Then she said something I'll never forget. Truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs a stage. By October 12th, our plan wasn't just survival, it was structure. We sat in the law office of Kayla Edmonds, a sharp, lean woman in her 40s, with eyes that caught everything and lips that never moved unless necessary. Her office overlooked a stretch of Patton Avenue, the glass streaked with drizzle and afternoon light. Behind her desk, a framed diploma from Howard, and beside it, a smaller photo of her mother in church whites. That alone told me enough. She read every page we brought without blinking, her pencil tapping the desk with silent rhythm. When she reached the forged quitclaim draft, her mouth twitched. "Bold," she murmured. "Sloppy, but bold." Henry sat beside me, his arm still in a sling, the bruise along his jaw fading but not gone. He hadn't spoken much that day, but when Kayla asked whether we were ready to proceed, he said, "Let's make it legal, all of it." That's when the revocation papers came out. Power of attorney, gone. Effective immediately. Notarized in duplicate, copies retained and submitted to the county clerk. The deed? Refiled. Only our names on it now. Kayla watched me sign, then turned the notary's seal like a slow-motion gavel. "You'll want to change your security questions too," she said, "and notify your HOA. Mail keys, digital locks, garage code, every access point. Shut them out before they sense the doors closing." We'd already begun. Brenda had reset the banking structure. Pastor Ray held our physical records. Latrice was compiling a timeline. And now Kayla gave it spine. Then came the threat. Melissa called that evening, her voice syrupy but shaking. We heard you're trying to cut us out. That's elder fraud, Hilda. You're vulnerable, and if you're being coerced. I hung up before she finished. 5 minutes later, an email arrived. We're prepared to take legal action for your safety. As if stealing 20 years of peace was an act of compassion. I forwarded it to Kayla. They're trying to flip the script, she said, adjusting her blazer. Claim you're being manipulated, that you don't know what you're doing. Then let them watch me do it with clarity, I replied. That night, I changed every password. I reprogrammed the door keypad. I texted our HOA president, Mr. Floyd, and told him Damien and Melissa no longer had access to our property. He replied instantly, "Understood. I'll inform security." Our house, for the first time in years, belonged only to us, and it was locked. The knock came just after 9 the next morning, October 13th. Sharp, insistent, 3 quick raps, like someone trying not to give themselves time to reconsider. Henry and I were in the kitchen, the kettle halfway to boil, when the front door shook under a second round of pounding. I peeked through the curtain, heart thudding low in my chest. Damien. He stood on the porch in a wrinkled button-down and dark jeans, hair uncombed, eyes wild. His fists were clenched. Behind him, neighbors peeked from parted blinds. Mrs. O'Leary, across the street, actually stepped onto her porch, arms crossed, phone already in hand. I opened the door, but left the screen latched. "You changed the locks," he said, voice low and shaking. "You cut us out." "I secured what's mine," I said evenly. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're ruining everything we've built." Henry stepped behind me, silent but present. Damien's eyes darted toward him. "You're turning her against us," he hissed. "You've always resented Melissa." It was almost comical, the script he clung to. As if love, stripped bare, could be mistaken for manipulation. As if betrayal required prompting. "You took from us," I said, finally unhooking the screen. "Years of savings, legal ownership. Now you're angry that we noticed." Damien stepped forward. Henry moved between us. And then it happened. Damien shoved him. It wasn't hard enough to knock him down, but it was forceful, public. And that was the moment the watching world shifted. Mr. Granger next door called out from his stoop. A car slowed. Somewhere, a child's voice asked, "Why's Grandpa yelling?" Henry steadied himself on the porch rail. "You put your hands on him?" I said, my voice ice. Before he could answer, a police cruiser pulled up at the curb. Officer Jenkins stepped out, hand on hip. Familiar face. He'd once helped Henry fix a flat outside the pharmacy. Today, he looked less neighborly. "We got a call," he said. "Multiple reports. Everything all right here?" Henry straightened. "My son came onto our property and became physical." Jenkins looked at Damien, who suddenly couldn't find his words. The officer took a statement. Names, time, incident, summary. Then he turned to Damien. "Sir, you're not listed as a resident. I'm going to ask you to leave the premises." Damien backed down the steps, face flushed. He didn't look back. The moment the car pulled away, I locked the door. By October 15th, it was time to let the truth breathe in public air. We chose Zion Hill Church Hall, familiar, neutral, sacred ground. The folding chairs creaked beneath the weight of family and friends. Every row filled with aunties, cousins, deacons, and neighbors who had baked casseroles for our recovery and whispered prayers when no one was looking. Word had spread without effort. Asheville's grapevine has always worked faster than mail. We invited everyone except Damien and Melissa. Pastor Ray stood at the podium, calm and composed, a man who delivered both baptisms and eulogies without changing tone. His presence lent weight to what came next. To his left, a folding table held manila folders, a laptop, and an envelope thick with receipts. Behind him, a small projector hummed, ready to cast proof across drywall. My palms were damp. Henry held them under the table and squeezed twice, our old signal for we're in this together. Pastor opened with scripture, then stepped aside. I stood. "My name is Hilda Davis Mallory," I said, voice clear. "I am here with my husband Henry to share something difficult, but necessary. We've been silent too long." I walked them through it all, slowly, deliberately. The withdrawals, the quick deed draft, the weekend without phones, the the 20,000 taken in the dark. Each fact clicked into place like a puzzle we'd lived through but never seen whole until now. I didn't speak in anger, I spoke in evidence. Then I passed the envelope to Pastor Ray. He held it up, showing everyone the police report from 1999, the bank records flagged by Ms. Brenda, the policy Melissa had forged 3 weeks before the fall. Henry's journal entries. Pastor Ray had verified every item with second copies, scanned, time-stamped, secured. Gasps came like stifled thunder from the back rows. Just as he began summarizing, the back door flew open. Melissa burst in. "This isn't legal," she screamed. "None of this was authorized. You can't do this." Her voice echoed off the walls, brittle and sharp. Pastor Ray didn't flinch. He turned calmly, picked up a signature page, and pressed a button on the laptop. The screen filled with 2 versions of Richard's name. One real, one forged, side by side. The difference was clear. The air shifted. Even without a courtroom, the room rendered its judgment. At exactly 6:47 p.m., Detective Latrice Connor stepped forward, legal pad in hand, blazer crisp, despite the humidity trapped inside the church hall. "I've reviewed the materials," she began, voice carrying with the trained command of someone who had once stood in courtrooms, not sanctuaries. "This is not a misunderstanding. This is a coordinated pattern. Financial manipulation, estate interference, and a potentially fatal cover-up." The silence in the room tightened like a held breath. She moved through the timeline with surgical precision. Richard's last known bank alert. The insurance policy amended just 23 days before his death. The medical examiner's report, long buried but not erased. Then the forged beneficiary form, Melissa's signature, unmistakably artificial compared against notarized records from the DMV, the font spacing, the hesitation in the loop of the R. All of it laid bare beneath the glow of a church projector. Gasps gave way to murmurs. Someone in the second row whispered, "Lord, have mercy." Then Latrice showed the money trail. $800 monthly transfers, beginning in 2019, disguised as support, but diverted toward Damien and Melissa's personal mortgage. The $20,000 Health Asset LLC withdrawal flagged by Mr. Alvarez. The cease and desist letter meant to silence us. Every detail backed with screenshots, documents, stamps. Melissa stood frozen in the aisle, one heel slightly askew, mascara trailing at her cheekbone. "You have no legal right to present this," she shouted. "This is a setup. You're attacking your own family." Latrice turned toward her without blinking. "This is documentation. You're welcome to submit a rebuttal. But this room," she gestured calmly, "has seen the evidence. And evidence doesn't need approval to be true." The weight in my chest lightened, not in joy, but in finality. Then Pastor Ray pressed one final button. Melissa's voice, from a recovered voicemail, crackled through the speakers. "We can still fix this. Just let the story stay buried." Her words hung like smoke in the rafters. Henry reached for my hand. I nodded. We hadn't shouted. We hadn't slandered. We had presented. As we stepped down, people stood. Not all, not in applause, but in respect. Recognition. A quiet, dignified acknowledgement of something ugly being brought into the light. This was never about vengeance. It was about clarity. And clarity, once given room, doesn't go back into the dark. The next morning, October 16th, sunlight slipped across our porch like it remembered the place. I stood there, fresh coffee in one hand, the other extended toward Henry with something solid pressed into his palm. New house keys. Shiny, unmarked, cold from the locksmith's safe. We'd had the locks changed at 7 a.m. sharp. Mr. Floyd from the HOA stopped by to confirm the gate code update. Everything was filed, sealed, protected. For the first time in years, our home belonged to no one else's agenda. Henry looked down at the keys, turned them over like he was memorizing the weight. Behind us, the screen door clicked gently. No slamming, no tension. Just the sound of closure done right. Then the cruiser pulled up. Sheriff's vehicle. Clean. No sirens. 2 deputies stepped out, one holding a folder, the other carrying what I instantly recognized, a warrant packet. They didn't hurry. They moved with the calm of people following a finished trail. Melissa and Damien weren't home when it happened. They had returned to their place in West Asheville late the night before, after storming out of the church with silence between them. But the sheriff's department had already been briefed. Latrice had delivered the files in person, and Kayla had confirmed every document as admissible. We watched from the porch as the cruiser turned toward their street. We didn't cheer, but I did breathe. Later that afternoon, attorney Kayla arrived carrying a flat envelope. Inside, the new inheritance trust, updated with our names only. A copy of the deed with no secondary signature. Powers of attorney assigned to each other, witnessed, notarized, archived. She handed it to me with quiet formality. "It's done," she said. "They'll have their chance to respond legally, but the fraud is recorded. The theft, traceable. The signature, prosecutable." I held the papers in my lap for a long time. At dusk, I walked through each room of our house, with the new keys jangling in my pocket, touching door frames, checking locks. Not to ward off fear, but to reclaim space. In the living room, I found the old Polaroid of Damien at 16, keys in hand, standing beside that rusted Camry. I didn't throw it away. I placed it in the drawer beneath the Bible, behind the folded note that once reminded me not to sign. Some things don't need burning, just boundaries. And new locks.